Curriculum Advisory Council will be discussing the graduation requirements later.
No, we
on the
gotta,
agenda.
we gotta go back to facilities, right?
Curriculum, we're going to graduation, then we're going to go to facilities now.
Yeah, curriculum, I don't have, there was no other additional discussions from that. I didn't call that council. In regards to facilities, that council met in early April, and they reported out, and Joe reported out to the board. I should say they met in March, and Joe reported out at the committee of the whole in March. I just want to bring up to the entire board at the committee of the whole, touch on a few things that were touched on in that March 27th report out from Joel, our Aramark manager. Boilers, Johnson Controls and Camus have been meeting and finalizing the boilers and getting them in sequence. Not due to the weather not being as cold, we're not using all the boilers, but the ones that we are using to do the general loop through the school, as well as to heat the domestic water supply, seem to be firing as they originally were installed, which they have not done for several years. So Camus and Johnson, we're just finalizing some of those controls to get them into sequence. But we're making progress on the boilers. The stack, there's no update on that as of this time. We're still managing that, and we're still working with 2010 in regards to seeing if there's any other areas that need to be addressed in regards to that sanitary basin stack. The field house, I included that in your weekly update. Joel has been working with Ed Farron, the architect from White, who oversaw the project here, and we had pursued with Ed that we had some concerns about the grading on that side of the field house, and he was able to identify with us on the plans that it was graded to spec, to the specifications that were met or detailed in the plan. However, you saw the email, White is going to cover at their cost, which is that's not something they feel they are obliged to do, but they want to do, is they're going to grind off that original coat along that wall of that field house, the north wall, and reseal it with a specific type of sealant that will not deteriorate and should seal all those joints to where we're getting flooding where the walls are meeting the floor. Now, what Ed Farron did share with Joel and said that if we wanted to bring him to the Facilities Council in May, he would have no problem coming, is that those plans were changed. The original plans for that field house was not meant to be a step-down facility, meaning you notice how you have to go down 2 steps to get into that facility. That was supposed to be leveled with the school, and the plans were, the board did approve a change order to save some of the costs related to the backfill and the labor and some of the supplies and materials that were going to be used to make that level with the rest of the school, to use those dollars for other projects in the renovation project. So the original plans called for that to be at a higher grade so that it was level with the school, and then a decision was made at the board level, a change order to change the specs, because then from what Ed was telling Joel is that then it was discussed that maybe it not be a full field house with the track, that maybe it be only 2 courts and not be a step-down facility, but not be as big and not require as much material to do the backfill and to raise it. And eventually a decision was made at the board level to change the plans so that not as much material and cost would go into that. So I don't know if that's their disclaimer to say, hey, we told you so. I'm just reporting back to the board.
There's no French drain around it, is there?
They seem to think that it's up to the specs in regards to drainage and that. I did not get the plans. I don't know if required specific drain tiles around that. I'm not an architect, but the main thing we talked about was the way the water was ponding against that wall. If the grade was off, and they said that it was graded to spec, but that they originally had suggested that it shouldn't be lower than everything because it would create a natural
One
downfall.
wants to go down. Yep.
That's what our architect said. I could always, if I'm planning on calling a facilities advisory council in May so that I can go through the facilities rental agreement. If that's something, I could always invite them to that. But I wanted to bring you up to speed. So they're going to pay for that. And Ed, as a certified architect and engineer, says he thinks this will eliminate the problem of the flooding in the field house, the specific sealant.
Thank you.
After we get it done, just take a fire hose and just keep on aiming it over there. And then have Ed stand on the inside holding a extension cord.
You have something on
Pour
school
2 feet
sign?
of concrete in it and then just put.
School sign,
Yeah,
It says something here about school sign.
yes.
It seems like more people know about than us, so I was wondering if you could let us share.
I think
Well,
one of
Boosters know about
the
it.
organizations earmarked some money.
Yeah, the boosters earmarked it. The Facilities Council had been working with us on it, and Dr. Keene had asked for me just to check on something before reporting to the board, in case it was a moot point. The location of the sign,
Yeah,
it's always been on First Avenue. But if you think about it, unless our parents from Brookfield are coming in off of First Avenue, or it's really not in a location that can advertise as well for the school or to serve its purpose. And then as I've been thinking about it over the last couple of weeks, waiting to hear back from the village and Joel to hear back from the village, unless you get stuck at that light, you're going 40, 45 miles an hour on First Avenue. You're not really going at a pace to where you're going to be able to read the reader board and see some of the announcements we're putting up there, or the students that we're trying to recognize, or the teams or clubs, or so we're thinking about possibly putting the sign on the corner here of Golf, and so that anybody coming to the school to get to the new entrance would see the reader board sign. So Joel Joel and I met with the building commissioner from Riverside, the village of Riverside. They talked to us, they gave us a couple suggestions. One, some of the people on the building commission or that committee for the village, I'm not sure how their structure is set up, but as soon as they said it, as parents, they were like, that makes total sense, because I would never see that sign every day dropping my kid off. Others inquired a little bit, but I guess through their discussion, they didn't see an issue with it. They do have an ordinance that an electronic sign needed on a I forget what the classification of the street, but it has to be 180 feet from residential property. Our specs came up on Golf okay for the Riverside houses of 180 feet. However, right across the corner is Brookfield, so they were the building commission was gonna check and see, even though we're in compliance on the Riverside line, do we have to worry about what the compliance is across the street of Brookfield? It's kind of unique. So they were gonna check back with Joel, because they have a process in place, a waiver process, that if we wanted to apply for that and request that they consider allowing us to put that sign on Golf, they have a waiver process that we would have to go through. So the second thing I have Joel doing right now is to check and see, okay, well, how much would it cost to trench electric out to it? The one thing they did request, which I appreciate them talking with us ahead of time, was they'd like to see, in order to maintain the architectural structure of the building and the dynamics of the building, they'd like to see similarities of that in the sign design. So they weren't opposed to the sign design that we got from the bank, or that the company gave us an example of the bank, but they would like to see in the brick or the actual design structure kind of match some of the structure of the architecture of the school. So Joe's working with one of the company that was giving us some of the quotes to see if we can tie that into that. So,
I thought that they ran electric out there.
it very well might be. Joel's checking on that.
Check that.
But the biggest thing would be the commission, first of all, the commissioner getting back to us on if we have to be worried about the Brookfield policy or not, since the sign sits on Riverside land.
I don't think so.
And then the second thing that they were gonna find out is, Joel was gonna start working with the sign company to see if we can change the brick structure or layout so that it does align more with our architectural facade, I think is the word, or maybe I'm wrong on that. But if this stuff clears, I would probably come back to the board and say I recommend, as long as our funding and some of those things we originally talked about, the more I've thought about it, it does make sense that our entrance to the high school and our parking on the street over there, it's slipping my mind right now, it's in our parking lot. I mean, it does make sense to have it possibly on that corner. And the thing that Joel and I talked about again this morning is, we might be able to, cover the cost of the electric and some of that, because now maybe we don't have to worry about it being as durable, being on First Avenue where it's getting salt thrown at it and the traffic and the vibration of the semis and all that. Now that it's sitting on a corner, that might be a little more stable.
Can we get some revenues from Brookfield Zoo on the days, those times when the traffic is backed up all the way back to First Avenue and they're waiting? They could talk about number of parking spots available in their parking lot and things like that.
Or we could talk about
Could
that.
actually,
Mr. Chairman?
maybe-
Just let them sell advertisement on it.
Yes.
All right, any questions on
Let's get
facilities?
the sign and then we could,
Any questions on facilities?